An entire family was murdered by a youthful addict in Florida. When officers arrived at the home, they found the youth staggering about in a human slaughterhouse. With an axe, he had killed his father, mother, 2 brothers, and a sister. He seemed to be in a daze. He had no recollection of having committed the multiple crimes. The officers knew him as ordinarily sane, rather quiet young man, and now he was pitifully crazed. They sought the reason. The boys said that he had been in the habit of smoking something which youthful friends called muggles, a childish name for marijuana. And that was an excerpt from Anslinger's Score Files. And this is Jen.
This is Becky.
This is her confused.
What the fuck does this have to do with my boy Sassie? I'm guessing that there's a lead into this, but I'm highly confused, as the listeners probably are too.
We are. So we're going to finish up talking about Sasquatch because I took a little bit of a chronological point, like starting off with indigenous. And
Loved
then,
it.
And Sasquatch in the same, and in this episode, we're going to finish up Sasquatch, but we're going to start talking about the growth of the Emerald Triangle and, of course, anti-drug legislation.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And okay. Anslinger is a big
does all
part
tie
of that.
in. It does all tie in. Okay.
But I just really like the quote. It sounds awful, and he gets down. It's for muggles.
It's
AKA marijuana.
I know some other muggles.
Yeah, I know.
I'm one.
So let's go ahead. This is Jen. This is Becky. Oh, we already done that. We're talking about Bigfoot and the Emerald Triangle, Part 2. And my sources are Sasquatch from Hulu, Wikipedia, California Adventure District, BBC, Cash Crop by Ray Raphael, Humboldt by Emily Brady, National Forest Foundation, Sasquatch Detective, Southern Style Sweet Teas, Bigfoot and Native American Folklore, a deep dive into a cultural legacy. The History Channel, nichecanada.org, North California Indian Development, University of Arizona, Arizona State Museum, Oregon Historical Society, Oregon Cyclopedia, The Reflector, Lake County Record B, Sasquatch, The Legend Meets Science by Jeff Meldrum, The Cannabis Trail, and Indigenous Peoples Resource Website. So, we were talking about the Patterson-Gimlin, and they had just looked at the film, and they saw that they had gotten some of it. So now we're going to talk about a little bit of the fallout. Bob Titmus, that we talked about last time, remember him? He was the tracker. Do. He was the man who helped supply the plaster for Ray Wallace's camp feed. And he also investigated the Patterson-Gimlin film and its claims. And you probably had never heard about...
Hold on. He was a taxidermist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was reviewing the films to tell us if they were true or not?
Just stay with me on that.
Okay. Just making sure I have everything in my head correctly, because it goes in all kinds of directions. And
that's why I had Jimmy read this. I was like, please, let me... make sure it's coherent, okay?
It is. I'm just trying to figure out what the taxidermist is. But it's fine. Go ahead. I'm sure it's all going to...
So, you never heard about Bob Titmus before this series. It's because he didn't seem to even look for fame. The tracker and taxidermist is famous in the Sasquatch world due to the significant amount of solid evidence he has actually found. His opinion on Roger's film brought a lot of interesting points. In a letter to a friend, he described investigating the incident and his feelings. I'm going to truncate the letter a little bit just to hit the finer points. And so if you try to come back and fact check me and tell me that that's not real, I already tell you.
I'm a tracker, too, of information.
By the end of the day, it has become apparent that a few viewers felt there was a possibility that the whole thing was an elaborate and expensive hoax. I felt that this possibility was so extremely remote as to be non-existent. None of these individuals witnessed more than one showing, I believe. However, I did have to take into consideration the fact that I believe that I viewed the film through somewhat different eyes than most of the persons present. I think that a taxidermist will see him retain far more detail while watching an animal and is probably far more qualified to recognize anything unnatural than the average person. Secondly, evidence that I witnessed in the mountains in Northern California about 10 years ago changed me from a non-believer to a believer, and since that time I've spent a major portion of those years, as you know, interviewing witnesses, investigating reports, collecting evidence, casting many, many different tracks, setting up cameras and live traps, tracking dozens of creatures dozens of times, etc. All of this was in an effort to capture one of the creatures. All of this only strengthened the case of the existence of the creature Bigfoot/Sasquatch. Thirdly, many years ago, I saw about one of these creatures at a fairly close range and watched it for about 90 seconds before it walked up into the timber. Since I know more about tracks and film, and generally feel that they will tell me a more accurate story than film, I had a very strong urge to see the tracks that were being made during the time that Roger was shooting his film. I felt the tracks would be very well prove or disprove the authenticity of the pictures. No one else seemed inclined or able to, so the following day I went to California to have a look at the tracks. It was not difficult to find the exact spot where Roger was standing when he was taking his pictures, and he was in an excellent position. I spent hours that day examining the tracks, which for the most part were still very good condition considering that they were 9 or 10 days old. Roger and Bob had covered a few of them with slabs of bark, and they were in excellent condition. The tracks appeared perfectly natural and normal, the same as many others that we had tracked and become so familiar with over the years, but at a slightly different size. Most of the tracks showed a great deal of foot movement. Some showed a little, and few indicated almost no movement whatsoever. I took plaster casts of 10 consecutive imprints, and the casts show a vast difference in each imprint, such as a toe placement, toe gripping force, pressure ridges and breaks, weight shifts, distribution, depth, etc. Nothing whatever here indicated that these tracks could have been faked in some manner. In fact, all the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. No amount of thinking or imagining on my part could conceive of a method by which these tracks could have been made fictitiously.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I didn't think about the whole fact that a taxidermist, they study things differently than I would say the normal person would. Like they do look at an animal structure and its muscular and its bone structure and everything.
Can I just say real quick that when you started reading that, I didn't realize you were reading someone's quote. I thought you were telling me your opinion.
No.
And that's the importance of eating more than 7 donut holes by 1 o'clock in the afternoon because your brain function goes down a little bit.
They really do, though. It sounded like I really knew what I was talking about, though, didn't it?
Wait, what?
You went to California? You didn't even tell me?
It was just in the beginning part. And then something caught my attention real quick that she's reading a quote, not telling you her opinion.
Bob would bring his Mr. Titmus, as I would say. He'd bring his sister Aline and his brother-in-law Harry to survey the Patterson-Gimlin site, and Aline would recall, quote, Harry had hunted some big game all of his life. He's been all over Africa, Alaska, the Yukon Territory, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and stated that this impressed him more than anything he's ever seen in the bush in all his travels. Harry has several tests and observation, one of which was to walk briskly beside the tracks to try to match their depth up to 1.25 inches of places. Harry's a 200-pounder, and at best he could do was an imprint of 1/4 inch on the rear portion of his shoe heel, and 1/8 inch and less on the rest of his shoe imprint. We both agreed that the depth of the two imprints made and the difference in the amount of the bearing surface that the creature made these tracks would have had to weigh at least 600 to 700 pounds.
Damn.
Right. So Bob had an associate named John Green, who was a Canadian journalist and an unofficial historian of the Sasquatch. I don't know how you get that title, but go for it. He went out for the next summer after Bob's letter and investigated to see what he could ascertain. He used a student from a nearby university, and using a camera located in Patterson's filming location, they were able to deduce that the figure was much taller than the 6'5" tall student. The arm span considerably greater, and the build all indicated a robust and muscular body that dwarfed the student's 180 pounds. In 1960,
Damn, he was 6'5" and 180. He was thin.
very thin. That was like
He's
Shaggy.
thin as that stick beside you.
In 1969, John would talk to Ken Peterson, who was an executive at Disney. He had told him that he'd studied the film and concluded it was not a hoax. It's just like Disney to keep the magic alive, you know?
It is. That's just another reason why I love Disney.
The technicians who studied the film said that it could only be accomplished by animation, but animation was nowhere near sophisticated, nor were there animatronic characters. The other option was
IG, no AI.
The other option would be a man in a suit, although that would be argued later. Bill Munns, retired with a special effects and makeup artist, cameraman, and film editor, he argues that Universal and Disney were not the most knowledgeable studios to consult with. He says that Fox, MGM, and special effects artist Stuart Freeborn in England, quote, who had just completed his groundbreaking ape suits for 2001 A Space Odyssey, would have been more preferable for this.
That's true. I like the way they're looking for the real experts in this.
Exactly. So, of course, John went and spoke to one of the top consumers in, costumers, not consumers. I was like, why is that? The top costumers in the field at the time, János Prohaska. János was a Hungarian immigrant who had worked in Hollywood since 1939, and one could say he was the foremost professional on monkey suits.
Okay.
He created the Gorilla Mugato for that bit Captain Kirk on Star Trek, and I believe he worked on some of the the what was it, Planet of the Apes or whatever. According to Janos, it did not move like a suit. The muscles were visible, and that type of suit did not exist. The closest would be 10 plus hours makeup applied directly onto the skin. And he concluded if that was a costume, that was the best costume I've ever seen.
I was going to say, I've seen some Planet of the Apes costumes from that time, and they were not as good as that one. So the people that made that would have had to been light years ahead of anybody else.
Exactly.
That's my hot take.
And like at the time, like when you first see it and you're thinking, oh, that's got to be somebody's suit, and then you start taking in those factors of the time period, and you're like, oh yeah, that can't have been.
Mm-mm.
The breakdown on the physical mechanics, gait, and form gets hella deep. To be quite frank, there has been quite a number of studies and investigations on this film, from reenactments to studies on biomechanics. One thing did come to my attention, though, which has been mentioned overall, but not quite like this, with the detail of the thighs of the creature. In a step, the thigh muscle tenses up like a hydraulic hose almost, and then relaxes at the end of the stride, which is evidence actually in the Patterson-Gimlin film. I say evident, it's blurry and quick, but there have been established stabilized versions that make it crisper and more evident than previously. I mean, it's not a damn close-up or anything, and I'm not a doctor, but I could see it.
You've never spoke anything that's not true
Thank
or
you.
accurate, so... And I agree.
Thank you. That's why you're my best friend.
Exactly.
I love you.
I would tell you the truth, and the truth is you're perfect. You haven't made mistakes, so...
And you are the same.
Thank you!
That's why we're twins.
Exactly!
The study of the mechanical aspects of an organism's life is called biomechanics, and while it's been around since the Egyptians, it's not as understood as it is now, despite it being a large part of the debate on the film's subject.
Wait a minute. My friend that graduated with the C average that knows more about what's going on in the world and these people, you're telling me that she really doesn't?
She really don't.
Oh. Damn, I've been trusting everything she's been telling me about what's going on in the world right now.
Science changes, as we all know, and knowledge of yesterday can rapidly change and alter all preconceived notions and information today. And in the case of advancement of biomechanics, Dr. Andrew Nelson from Idaho State University viewed the film and was asked about the odds of such details of anatomy and pathology being functionally incorporated into a costume in 1967. So he said this: after analyzing the biomechanical issues of the Patterson footage, I find it very hard to believe that somebody in 1967 could have fabricated the intricacies of the soft tissue anomaly as evidenced by the irregularity of the thigh. The understanding of the biomechanics at that time was primitive at best.
And not to, like demean the men that took the video, but I don't think either of them were smart enough to put all those tidbits of information and thought into it.
Yeah.
To make such an accurate representation of it.
It's
they
like-
weren't like, we got to make sure the thigh muscle is moving like it's supposed to. I can guarantee they did not.
20 years from now, they're going to be talking about it.
Exactly.
Another thing that uses biomechanics are video games. Kyle Council, a computer graphics animator, viewed the footage as well and said this: as part of my craft, I have an intuitive sense of natural human movement. I animate human characters for games. When I view the Patterson-Gimlin film, I see a mode of movement that is not human, but human-like. The arm swing and movement of the shoulder girdles are clearly that of a truly massive frame. The musculature of the creature is very thick, but not restrictive to the range of motion in the shoulder joints. In the trapezius muscle group, the diamond-shaped set of muscles that anchor the shoulders and the nape of the neck and the upper thoracic vertebrae, the contraction of these thick muscle sheets is clearly visible. In the cadence of the walk, the presence of great and compact body mass is also evident. Also, the creature's knee, not reaching full extension, is certainly an adaptation of supporting great weight. A fully extended knee has poor resistance to a twisting force. In conclusion, the reality of the film's subject as a uncatalogued animal is self-evident. It simply cannot be a costume. The boundaries of the human form do not even fit within the form of the creature. Which I was like, oh, when he said that, I was like, that's a good fucking point.
Not only that, I just wanted to point out that this man's explanation is a perfect example of when people look at other people's jobs and they're like, I could do that. Clearly you can't, because this man is extremely educated in what he does. And he's talking about the thoracic vertebrae. Half the people out there saying they can do the job don't even know what those are.
Exactly.
And I didn't even realize, like, wow, he really does take into account everything when he's making these characters, which is what makes these games so lifelike. Sorry, I know that's a complete tangent.
No, but
that has
it's
nothing to do with the
exactly
story.
like that was the thing that was like the clincher for me. Like, yes, all these other things like pointing out, but it's hard for me to see. And I'm like, and then he got there and he started pointing out like, well, if this creature, based off these measurements, or 7-8 foot tall, 500 pounds, and they could make that impression like a regular human can't fit in that.
Yeah. All Jennifer needed was it compared to video games.
That's it.
Bam, makes sense. Light bulb
Done.
goes off.
Furthermore, the mass of the creature is not great and carried with such poise. A man could not even be trained to carry such a great weight, or walking bearing weight in such a fashion. The muscle mass is, if there had been padding, would have been static and restrictive. The presence of visible muscle contraction, the freedom of movement, the cadence of the walk, all fully support the claim that the footage documents a living hominid outside the genus of man.
If I wasn't a believer, I am now.
For real.
And that's like for real.
That's for real. Well, in 1972, just 4 years after catching Bigfoot on film, Roger Patterson died of cancer, but maintained that to the end that it was real. But others have come forward in the years claiming otherwise. In 1998, a man named Bob Hieronymus came forward claiming that he had been the man in the suit. In 2002, a man named by Philip Morris, a costume maker from North Carolina, said Patterson had bought a custom ape suit via mail order and had remained silent. While Bob had also corroborated...
First of all, no mail order ape suit is going to look that good. What was this, the 60s?
Yeah. It was 1967, I think is when it was.
He would have had to order that out of a catalog that he was thumbing through, so go sit the fuck down.
And he said it was a custom order. So, baby, how you going to custom order anything through a catalog?
The math ain't mathin'.
The math ain't mathin'. I think they're both kind of try to cash in on the fame.
Oh, of course they are. They're like,
tape, really.
Order your costumes from us because look at the high quality one we made. People think it's real.
Exactly.
And then you get a fucking plastic mask that has a rubber band around over your head in the mail.
And then there's another problem is that the original tape from the movie has been lost. Although there are several copies of it, that original film can't be studied. They can't see if anything's been done to it.
See if the film was sliced and taped together like you used to have to do when your cassettes got wound up in the...
That's right. So at least avoiding studying the film without the original. I guess much like studying Sasquatch without his physical presence. Gimlin was quiet for many years, not making a dime off the story until the 2000s when he finally started interviewing again until his death in 2021. Is it real? I think so. I think if it happened now, we have the skills and tech to create such magnificent costumes and animatronics. I mean, look at 1993's Jurassic Park T-Rex. It stands up to the test of time. But 1968's Planet of the Apes doesn't. So is it real? What do you think?
Is Bigfoot the suit real? The tape real? I'm sorry.
Is the tape
I have
real?
so many things in my head going on. The tape real, yes, I think the tape is real.
Same. So what is it? Why is it so hard to capture on film? What is Bigfoot? Well, the first possibility is in the realm of debunking because it is cases of mistaken identity. The first culprit is that of the American black bear.
Stop. It's always a black bear.
Always a black bear. It's hairy. It's stinky. They can walk on their back legs bipedally, although not as well as exhibited in sightings. There's also evidence, however, of black bears walking on two legs solely due to injury. So I won't say it's out of the realm of possibility.
His arms are not as long.
No.
Carry on. Next.
And when they're standing, they can be 5 to 7 feet tall, and that does fit with some of the sightings reported. But the facial structure of a bear is much different than the many descriptions of Bigfoot's face. Bears do have a long snout, like a dog with a little wet nose and all. Bigfoots reportedly have more human facial features. Ape facial features are a mixture of two, in which neither have a protruding snout. The other culprit is an escaped ape, which I know sounds crazy, but hear me out. I would say hear me out, but it's you.
My friend took a picture of a kangaroo in Baytown the other day, so things happen.
Florida is home to iguanas, monkeys, African apple snails, lionfish, pythons. The list goes on. And none of those are native, although some have been there for quite some time. The monkeys in Florida have been living, were reportedly from the 1920s Tarzan movie, filmed in Silver and Wakulla Springs, but that's not true. They were bought in the 1930s to increase tourism, and then the others got out of a research facility in 1992 during Hurricane
That does
Andrew.
happen.
Yes. Friendly Florida tips on animals. The monkeys are highly likely to be affected with herpes type B. Iguanas fall out of the tree when it's too cold. Snakes love orange trees for the mice and other creatures there for the fruit, and they will jump out to you. And it is absolutely legal to kill pythons. In fact, there's a bounty on all their little snake heads.
Interesting.
Regardless.
Good to know. How much is that bounty? Because I could go do some snake hunting. JK. I'm not going in the jungle.
You ain't gonna find me in that. Not in the Everglades. Regardless, Florida isn't the only state known for having non-native animals escape. By now, we have all seen Tiger King and Chimp Crazy, so people just be out there with wild animals that have absolutely no business having them because it leads to attacks and escapes.
Facts on facts on facts.
Also, when you take a look at other examples of Bigfoot all over the world, there are instances of overlap when fiction possibly meets reality. One of them is the orang pendek. It's an Indonesian folklore to be a bipedal man of 4 to 5 feet in height and covered in black or brassy colored fur that roams western Sumatra. While apes are known to walk on 4 legs, they can walk bipedally, and orangutans kind of fit the description at times. But then there are comparisons to sun bears and the Siamang gibbon monkeys, and those also loosely fit the description. I cannot say the orang pendek isn't real or is real, but I can deduce that there is a mystery happening in the jungles of Indonesia, and with my soft constitution, I won't be finding out. There's also the possibility of pareidolia. Do you know what that is? I didn't. It's a tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. Think about like a Rorschach ink blot test or seeing Mary Magdalene's image on a slice of burnt toast.
Or seeing water where the heat is.
Exactly. I think we've all had that moment where we wake up and think we see something creepy in our room for it to turn out to be a jacket that is just set in a chair ride or a robe on a hook.
Oh, I like to think it's ghosts, but go ahead.
Pareidolia is just what you're experiencing. Scientifically, what is happening is almost like a ring doorbell effect in your brain. The fusiform face, or FFA for short, is an area of your brain that is part of the human visual system specialized for facial recognition. A 2009, magnetoencephalography study found that objects incidentally perceived as faces invoke a early, talking about 165 millisecond early activation in the FFA at a time and location similar to that evoked by faces, whereas other common objects don't evoke such an activation. So it's kind of like how babies look, meaning that your brain's FFA gives just a slight advantage searching for faces specifically and bringing them to your attention faster than other items like plants or furniture. And that's where like that Ring doorbell comes in. It reminds me that Ring doorbell, it has a package feature and a people feature and stuff, is actively scanning for a box and actively scanning for faces, except it's our brains looking for eyes, nose, and a mouth. There are also more celestial possibilities. That of them being extraterrestrials and brought by UFOs.
That's true too. Good.
That they can shapeshift or are psychic and possibly able to cross into different dimensions, a completely supernatural origin. There are researchers such as paranormal author Nick Redfern who believes Bigfoot can produce infrasound, which explains why some of the witnesses report feeling disoriented, dizzy, and anxious, and hearing strange vocalizations credited to the Sasquatch. And the last possibility is that of an unidentified hominid. Because the nomenclature or language can be confusing, I want to make sure that we all know what each term means because some sound almost exactly like, and it's just a lot. Okay? In biology, there's a taxonomic ranking system for all flora and fauna. So for humans, ours is as follows. Domain is Eukaryota, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, order primates, family Hominidae, our genus is Homo, and our species is Homo sapiens. And for this conversation, we're going to focus on family and below. But if you want to know more, attend a 6th grade biology class or something, because I ain't got the brain power for the finer nuances of taxonomy outside of Bigfoot.
Well,
Hominidae, or hominid, is known as the great apes. They are made of 8 extant species and 4 genera. Extant means still alive, not extinct. These genera are the pongo, which is 3 types of orangutans, the gorilla, which is the eastern and western gorilla, the pan, which is made of the chimpanzee, and the bonobo, and then finally ours, which is Homo, which only we as Homo sapiens remain. The hierarchy is important when speaking of Bigfoot, as he could very well be the 5th genus. But let's back up for a second and continue down the path of discovering speciation, aka the discovery of a divergence in species, creating a whole new species. Many scientists over the last 100 years have erroneously stated that there is no large animals left to be discovered. There just can't be anything of substantial size that has gone unnoticed by humans. And one such scientist was Frederick Cuvier, who insisted that legends of the Yeti were just legends as there was no larger unknown animals roaming the Himalayas. And many believe the sublimation of animal footprints in snow are what is being falsely believed as Bigfoot prints. Sublimation happens when snow or ice like evaporates without melting, like leaving water behind. So it takes like a print from like a bear and it makes it wider or deeper, along those lines. This false confidence, though, it would come to an end in 1825 when he discovered an unknown larger animal, the red panda.
Oh,
My Emma loves the red panda.
yes, she does.
It's native to eastern Himalayas. While at 33 pounds, you can't say it was abdominal. It exactly wasn't tiny either and probably gave old Cuvier a plate of humble pie.
Mm.
The next discovery we'll talk about won't be as small. In a museum in Belgium, Ernest Schwartz made a discovery. It was a skull labeled as a chimpanzee, but there were distinct differences showing, and it was not a regular juvenile chimpanzee. This would become known as the bonobo, and it would become its own site-specific taxon. By 1933, American anatomist Harold Coolidge elevated the bonobo to a species-specific status. While similar and from the same distant ancestors, the bonobo is much more slender, smaller in stature, and much less aggressive, but similar enough to the chimpanzee that it's easy to confuse the two or assume they're the same. Turns out, 900,000 years ago, the Congo River had gotten low enough for the Panhomini, the ancestral group for chimpanzees and bonobos, to easily traverse. Eventually, there came a time that it became too deep, fracturing the group. Throughout the years, the acidification and spread of the African grasslands led to the evolution of two different types of apes. Those north of the river had to compete with the other groups like the ancestral gorillas. They had to fight for resources in addition to learning how to fend for themselves through survival of the fittest. Those who were the strongest and most aggressive usually got to mate, leading to distinguishing traits of the chimpanzee emerging over generations. Whereas those south of the river had tons of resources and little to no competition, so this meant their demeanors were more likely to share and focus on friendship instead of competition.
And you said this was north and south?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like Korea.
Right?
The south was all right.
Sounds right. North is like, y'all need to calm your shit. Besides the fact that it was hidden in plain sight, the formation of the bonobo is reminiscent of our early ancestor, a hominin called Australopithecus. The first example of Australopithecus was found in 1924 in Tong, South Africa, and it was a 3-year-old child, and it had striking human and ape characteristics. It's bipedal, and despite its small brain, changing beliefs on brain size and evolutionary traits meant that it would be smarter than they probably anticipated.
Okay.
And it also had 32 teeth like humans. While the bonobo does not solely walk bipedally, it is built much like Australopithecus, and it suggests that humans may have also went through a bonobo-like phase, and featuring less aggression and associated anatomical changes that kind of come with that. So there are a few hominids that could possibly be a missing link. You have Parathropus robustus, and it's a species of robust Australopithecine from the Middle Pleistocene age, originating from the cradle of humankind in Africa. The cradle of humankind is the largest known concentration of human ancestral remains anywhere in the world, as far back as 3.5 million years ago.
Interesting.
Then you have the Gigantopithecus blacki, which is originally credited as the Tibetan Yeti in folklore and migrated across the Bering Land Bridge to the Americas, giving us the American Bigfoot. The problem is that it's more ape-like and quadrupedal, and there is a speculation that this evolved hominin traits such as bipedalism and adducted hallux that is more human-like, talking about like your attached big toe to your feet. This speculation stops when you realize the Gigantopithecus is descended from orangutans from around 12 million ago, and we're not even related to them. So it's like kind of similar, but kind of not. All that to say, we don't know what it is, but it's got to be out there. Now, while the debate if it's real or not is always a subject of controversy, so is the Emerald Triangle. And that's where we're going to pivot.
Let me say my Bigfoot theory.
Tell me your Bigfoot theory.
What I'm interested that no one has ever talked about, and, my theory could be completely wrong and no relation, but there was Neanderthals, and Neanderthals were more covered in hair. They walked like humans. They didn't speak a language. And if you subscribe to the Darwin theory, we all evolved from something. I think Neanderthals, maybe there was a with the DNA, and that is what evolved into a Bigfoot. And we all have Neanderthal DNA in us.
That's true. That is very true.
But yet we're so different from them at the same time.
But it's a very good point, because there's so many times that people have said, oh, well, this is impossible. And then we find these discoveries where, oh, well, humans weren't around this long ago. Wait, hold up. We found another one that's way older.
Yeah, exactly.
So eventually, maybe one day we'll find that bridge, find that missing a link that helps completely answer the Bigfoot thing.
I think there were Neanderthals' DNA just went this way and they became Bigfoots.
But
and that's
if
what
we
Bigfoots
find
are.
missing links,
yes,
maybe we'll find Bigfoot.
Then maybe I could rerun my DNA and have 1% Bigfoot in me.
Oh, I can only wish. Ooh, I want that.
Dream. A girl can dream.
Let's reel back to the history of California for a second. We spoke about the boom of people after World War II. This put people further into the deep NorCal forests, further than ever before. The next boom who would flood NorCal and become neighbors with Bigfoot is the back to land movement of the 60s and the 70s. Being a lawless land that is very remote, it is attractive to the hippie movement after San Francisco became overladen with people, drugs, and violence at an increasing rate. Those who had become disenchanted with growing urban sprawl and industrial culture would seek a more agrarian life by going back to the land. This sprawl was due in part to the post-World War II baby boom. It led to another 2 million people being added to the population, and they're still fucking annoying us till this day. But I digress. Then you had the same people. I'm just kidding, boomers. I love you. Then you add the same people who created the boomers, also created the white picket fence, 2.5 kids, and a dog ideal in the 40s and 50s. In turn, Americans made that ideal synonymous with American freedom. The problem is that we all know America is more about consumerism than freedom. So it led to the middle class emerging as a byproduct. More people equals more consumers. More consumers equals more money for big companies. The social norms and cultures of the middle class created a counterculture reaction. There's a ton of social unrest at the time. The 20-year Vietnam War was raging, and materialism was at an all-time high with the madmen marketers of the 50s and the 60s. People were faced with the ultimate question. Do you make a living for yourself, or do you make a life? One is a rat race of consumerism, and the other is living simply and sustainably. So, of course, the Back to Land movement gained more traction because of all this, as well as the focus on holistic living to protect the environment. When reading about what it's like for those first groups of folks to live out in the remote sequoia forests of NorCal, it felt a little bit culty, not gonna lie. The Back to Landers lived a bit more hyper-local community style, and that's not my vibe, dog. I want to be a hermit in a cave, but to each your own. They focus on self-reliance and intentional living, also not me. Everyone contributed to the group to keep that homeostasis. That meant your next door neighbor could be your teacher. Your parent could be the person handling the water supply, so on and so forth. Basically, a libertarian lifestyle of self-governance. I did see someone call it a utopian socialism, and that quite rightly describes it. It's natural and more community-attuned lifestyle. They take the old adage, quote, it takes a village to raise a child in a literal sense, meaning we are all the village and everyone was each other's child. In other words, think of the Beatles. I am the Warwish song. I am he as you are me, and we are all together.
Oh, man, she might get a recording deal out of that. That's beautiful.
I could only wish. Once folks got out there, they of course started growing their own food, but also pot for medicinal purposes, of course. Wink, wink. They realized that the land of NorCal was superb for growing and gave exceptionally good flavor and cannabinoid profiles. Being only reliant on the land, you free yourself from many shackles of society. However, even if you can plant your own food and attain water from a natural source, some money is needed for things that are not attainable in the NorCal woods. Last time I checked, there weren't any bong trees or Birkenstock bushes.
I don't know. I haven't explored all of the area, but I haven't come across any.
Not yet. Here's hoping. The Emerald Triangle's microclimates, influenced by its elevation, proximity to the coast, and inland valleys, offer a mix of hot, dry days and cool, damp nights. These conditions allow cannabis to thrive in ways that are hard to replicate anywhere else in the world. The combination of warm daytime temperatures and cool nights helps the plants develop a rich terpene and cannabinoid profiles.
Did not know that. The more you know.
The more you know. Making the cannabis produced in NorCal distinct in both flavor and potency. This is the unintentional birth of the Emerald Triangle, but its reputation and purpose had yet to take hold. Let's pause and talk about cannabis for a second because it feels like it's my civic duty. I mean, if it is this important to a story about people being murdered and Bigfoot being blamed, I need to give you the herbal foundation, okay?
You do. I need all of the information.
What am I but just a person of context, you know?
Exactly.
People have been getting high since the 3rd millennium in BC in written history and pre-pottery Neolithic B, which is 8,000 BCE years ago.
Wait, they were smoking weed back then?
Yeah.
Oh, did not know.
It was cultivated for fiber, food, and of course,
Hemp
the
was, yes.
psychoactive properties. The classical Greek historian Herodotus, 480 BC, reported that the inhabitants of Scythia would often inhale the vapors of the hemp seed smoke, both as ritual and for their own pleasurable recreation.
Of course they were.
But the things would go up a notch at the turn of the 2nd millennium when they learned how to make hashish from resin.
There definitely was no drug test back then.
No, absolutely not. And then with hashish's creation, it would spread like wildfire into the Arabic world, and in turn spread to Africa, Europe, and the Americas. King Henry VIII strongly encouraged cultivating it for their English Navy. Hemp makes great ropes. In the Americas, Spanish Florida. In the Americas, Spanish Florida explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, describing the many tribes of native peoples he encountered between 1527 and 1537, wrote, "Throughout the country, they get inebriated by using a certain smoke and will give everything they have in order to get it." The attitude, or shall I call it a buzzkill, of marijuana being so addictive, people will give up everything and anything to have it, led to being outlawed over the centuries.
First of all, I don't think that the fucking Native Americans were out there pawning their wolfskins for fucking weed like a goddamn meth head pawning his mom's car. Get the fuck out of here.
The beaver pond.
Like, get the fuck out of here. They could grow that shit themselves. They knew how to fucking harvest the land, live on the land, use everything down to the fucking toenail of a bear they killed. So get the fuck out of here, bro.
Thank you.
Talking shit.
A report done by the British Indian Hemp Drugs Commission in 1894 to 1895 framed it like this, quote, "Viewing this subject generally, it may be added that the moderate use of these drugs is the rule and that the excessive use is comparatively exceptional. The moderate use practically produces no ill effects. In all but the most exceptional cases, the injury from habitual moderate use is not appreciable.
The only real effect is paranoia, let's be real.
The excessive use may certainly be accepted as injurious, though it must be admitted that in many excessive consumers, the injury is not clearly marked. The injury done by the excessive use, however, confined almost exclusively to the consumer himself. The effect on society is rarely appreciable. It has been the most striking feature in this inquiry to find out how little the effects of hemp drugs have obtruded themselves on observation."
Exactly.
He's like, literally,
You're
unless you're getting a little too wild out there, which is very rare.
You're going to fall asleep before you can smoke too much.
I mean, really, the way I see it is how we view using any medication. Meaning, if you use it responsibly, it's no biggie. But it can ruin your life if you do too much of it.
Weed can, come on, get the fuck
Well,
out
no,
of
I
here.
mean,
make
like-
you too lazy, eat too much, get a little overweight.
Yes, like in anything, any facet, smoking too much cigarettes or drinking too much, all these things can have like a negative effect on you, but not like life-altering negative effect. Really? How do I say that?
I don't know any negative effects of weed, and I don't even smoke it.
There are things that are happening, but it's only because of people
Mixing things with it?
not only that, but the THC levels, they're making it too potent, and it's causing actual disorders in people now.
But that's because people are doing that to it, not because if you just go out there and grow a weed bush like you would a flower in your front yard, you're not going to have problems.
No.
But it's when people go fucking with things that you start having problems.
Yes.
So my point is true.
It's true.
Thank you. I feel seen. Like the shining star I am. Although I was upset you weren't in the garage waiting for my arrival like the princess I am, but I digress.
I'm sensitive to that sun, okay? However, it really is just like the government to step in and give help where none is needed, you know?
Oh, you mean like they're doing now? But who am I?
Just a girl.
Doing a podcast.
Their best friend.
That's all.
But why outlaw it specifically? Sometimes it's due to religious reasons, sometimes productivity. Napoleon had to ban it from his own troops. But for America, a lot of it was racism, greed, and misinformation to nobody's surprise.
Shocking.
Oh, it can't have been the racism, Jen, is what I'm sure some of you are probably saying, but you just wait, okay? In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act came into law. This was a consumer protection law against mislabeled and misbranded food and drugs. This was in large part to food quality and safety declining as the time it took to get from farm to table took longer. So, like, that's when they started adding preservatives and shit. Not like the good ones, though, like formaldehyde.
Right.
This also protected consumers against the scam artists with quack medicine we heard of so often in those times. You know, the ones who put opium in cough syrup for a good night's rest?
Hold on. First of all, that wasn't a bad idea. We are just too uptight. But whatever.
But this legislation is why we have an
I would
active
love a little
yes.
opium cough syrup to sleep at night.
I would be out like a light.
Yes, I have a hard time going to sleep sometimes and getting a full restful REM night's sleep. A little opium would probably help that.
It would keep you asleep. That's for sure.
I don't want to go to sleep forever.
No, I mean, not forever, but it will be like you go down and you are down.
I've been stretching all during this because my neck and shoulder are really hurting. A little opium would help that right now.
Oh my God. Work it right out.
That's all I'm saying.
What pain? What pain?
Exactly. Anywho, I digress.
The active ingredients that you see on medicine labels, well, this is where that legislation came in. That's why it's there. The unfortunate part was that they also classified marijuana as addictive and dangerous alongside alcohol, morphine, and opium. One of those things are not like the other, but I digress. In 1930, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was created with Harry Anslinger heading it. Remember the one from earlier that we were talking about? The quote from the beginning. Harry had a hard-on for erasing drugs. He once said...
Probably would have been there for Prohibition, too.
Oh, absolutely. He once said that the best cure for addiction, never let it happen.
I mean, that's true.
But he's like, that's like an old-timey just say no.
I mean, you should to bad drugs.
You should, but like...
It's not applicable to everything.
But it's like, you know what stops babies? Abstinence. But you ain't going to get it.
That's true. I practice it in my home.
You know what? Because that's what you should, right?
Even though I can't have babies. Just to be safe.
You never know. I did know a lady who had, her husband had a vasectomy and she had a tubal ligation and somehow she still got pregnant.
See?
And I remember going, oh my God, congratulations. She goes, girl, don't. I did things to stop this and it still happened. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Many believe that it was more likely just because it was a new department. He wanted everybody to know it and he was in charge. So he really like took this by force.
As I like to say, this is when someone new comes in and they want to put a feather in their cap.
There you go.
I did that.
That's perfectly said. As you are.
Thank you.
The FBN is actually the precursor to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency that we all know and love. Regardless, he began an all-out war on drugs.
They do some good things.
Yeah.
I don't need the Colombian drug lords coming in here.
Well, yeah, let's keep that out of here.
So, I mean, balance is what we really need.
We're all about balance here. Regardless, he was on an all-out war on drugs, and he would use propaganda to help put a negative light on weed. His high-profile campaign had a general air of racism, which reflects in the greater view of what was happening at the time. So the Mexican Revolution, which lasted from 1910 to 1920, saw the immigration of many Mexicans during this period. With them, they brought the tradition of smoking in the fields after a hard day's work, which makes even more sense, seeing as there was a prohibition on alcohol from 1920 to 1933.
You say smoking in the fields after they...
Yeah, like after they've been working in the fields all day, they just drop where they at, light up.
I mean, okay, the day's over. Let them in do what they want to do. They just worked a hard fucking day in the heat.
Hard day. Hard day.
Leave them the fuck alone.
Really?
You ain't going to go out there and do it.
Hell no, you ain't.
So shut the fuck up.
Really, at this point, marijuana was mostly used in the Southwest and not widely used as cocaine and opium was. It was a very small problem, if you could even call it that. Regardless, there was a huge amount of anti-immigrant sentiment at the time. Not that I would know what living in in a country that would be like that. Wait, that is America right now. Prohibition of marijuana was another way of pushing back against unwanted immigration. Anslinger would be openly racist to the point that politicians requested he resigned.
Wow.
This
That's
was
like really racist because they all racist.
I mean,
so when the racists say you're racist,
that's what
That's
what my
bad.
next line is. This is evident in all his propaganda. He was so racist. He was regarded as a crazy racist in the 1920s,
okay.
where casual racism was the flavor of every day.
So you was bad. You was bad.
Awful. He hated addicts in any color other than white. And here are a
Wow.
few examples of actual comments
Oh,
he's
thanks,
made.
Jen. I was just thinking I would love to hear some of this sick motherfucker's actual words. So thank you.
Colored students at the University of Minnesota partying with white female students smoking marijuana and getting their sympathy with stories of racial persecution. Result? Pregnancy.
You know what he sounds like? The no fun police.
The no fun police. 2 African Americans took a girl, 14 years old, and kept her for 2 days under the influence of hemp. Upon discovery, she was found to be suffering from syphilis. Reefer makes black people think they're as good as white men.
Oh.
And that's not what he said. He didn't say black people.
Oh, I know he didn't. I know he didn't.
He was also strangely worried about white women's virtue. I'm talking about their virginity. And that smoking pot would lead them to having sex with black people.
Did his wife cheat on him with an African
That's
American?
all I can think. Like he was like, weed and colored. Nope, ain't about it. I was like,
Did he come home and she was smoking a doobie all back with her African American boyfriend? Because it sounds like what happened to you.
It
sir.
sounds like he has a personal vendetta.
It does.
He reportedly
Your girlfriend leave you in high school? You can't get over it?
You know, Billie Holiday, her song Strange Fruit, which was about lynchings that I talked about and the last time I did her story. He actually targeted her, but it was mostly because she liked drugs and jazz.
The devil's lettuce and the devil's music.
He felt like jazz musicians and drugs went hand in hand and wanted to create a national dragnet to catch jazz musicians.
Oh my!
Catch jazz musicians.
Oh my! Now I can't even say it. Jazz
musicians. Keeping it in a file called Marijuana and Musicians.
Oh, shut the fuck up.
He would write.
This is ridiculous.
It is so ridiculous. He was in charge of a whole government department, an important one.
Of all the things you could fight, it was jazz musicians. Look at, I said it right.
He would write a book in 1964 called
Of course he would.
The Protectors, and it would include a chapter called Jazz and Junk Don't Mix. And here's an excerpt.
Junk. Did he mean like people's junk?
Jazz entertainers are neither fish nor fowl. They do not get the $1 million protection Hollywood and Broadway can afford for their stars who have become addicted. And there are many more than will ever be revealed. Perhaps this is because jazz, once considered a decadent kind of music, has only token respectability. Jazz grew up next door to crime, so to speak. Clubs of dubious reputation were for a long time the only places where it could be heard. But the times bring changes, and as Billie Holiday was a victim of time and change, so too was Charlie Parker, a man whose music, like Billie's, is still widely imitated. Most musicians credit Parker, among others, as spearheading what I call modern jazz. Like, sir, we didn't need any of that. We don't care.
Nobody cares what kind of music you like, sir.
An interesting parallel to today's propaganda, Anslinger would use mass media and yellow journalism to help spread information. Yellow journalism is pretty much what we have now, where they use very attractive headlines just to get your attention.
Mm.
He began the Gore Files, which are a collection of quotes from police reports that depict crimes caused by drug users. There would be 200 Gore stories, but the most famous one is based on Victor Licata. An entire family was murdered by a youthful addict in Florida. When officers arrived at the home, they found a youth staggering about in a human slaughterhouse. With an axe, he had killed his father, mother, 2 brothers, and a sister. He seemed to be in a daze. He had no recollection of having committed the multiple crimes. The officers who knew him ordinarily as sane, rather quiet young man, now he was pitifully crazed. They sought the reason. The boy said that he had been in the habit of smoking something which youthful friends called muggles, a childish name for marijuana.
Honestly, you know what probably caused it? What caused him to do it?
What do you think?
Vaccines.
Shut the front door. I love you. Turns out he ain't never smoked weed in his life. He had a history of mental illness and psychosis, and nowhere in his medical paperwork does it describe him taking any illicit substances nor them being the cause of his illness.
That was all caused by vaccines, though.
And if this story kind of sounds similar, have you ever heard of the Reefer Madness propaganda film?
Of course I haven't, but go on.
Reefer Madness had like a resurgence in the 1990s, but back in those days, this film was made, and it's like Reefer Madness, like all these kids are dying and getting pregnant and all these things. Like, oh my god,
and it's
crazy.
all because of.
And it was like some kind of like white Christian nationalist group put this together, and it was like tell your children, and then they changed it to Reefer Madness, and then they shelved it, and then somehow it came back out again in the 90s, and so
that sounds very 90s.
And so they got the gore story from that. So researchers have now proved that Anslinger wrongly attributed 198 of the gore files to cannabis usage, and the remaining 2 cases could not be disproved because no records existed concerning the crimes. So the crimes never happened. He would retire in 1962, but not before having a mental breakdown with intense paranoia and irrational thoughts, such as believing that addiction was contagious. And that
just like, oh God.
Hold on, let me say this just like how I think somebody else would say it. Addiction was contagious. And addicts had a party talking about
I didn't understand any of that, but it was beautiful to watch.
That was my RFK
Oh, I knew what it was.
For you guys who don't know, he began talking about secret plots to the other world, and he was eventually hospitalized because of this breakdown. He died in 1975 at 83 of heart failure and suffering in a large prostate, because I just like to add insult to injury.
He had to be quarantined?
Yeah. No, he didn't have to be quarantined. He thought that addicts had to be quarantined, and then he also started talking about secret plots that were happening throughout the world.
I thought you said he had to be hospitalized.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, so
because
I
of his
said he had to
breakdown.
be quarantined because I was just being facetious.
There you go. I was just so mad at my own reading that I was like,
this is why we can't record too much in one day. We don't
really
last
can't.
long.
I can only do 2.
Yeah,
and then
that's it.
I start stuttering like crazy.
Yep.
Anslinger aside, the war on weed would continue to wage with the marijuana, and it's spelled with an H instead of a J. I don't know why, but I always want to say marijuana. Tax of 1937. This effectively made weed possession and transfer illegal with the exception of medical and industrial uses. And even with those 2 uses, while still being legal, would be subject to several taxes and administrative requirements. It would be deemed unconstitutional later on and overturned, but more and more legislation has come and gone in its stead. You have your Boggs Act of 1952, which created mandatory sentencing and increased punishment. It meant a first-time cannabis possession offense would end up with a minimum of 2 to 10 years and a fine of $20,000.
Damn. Never going to financially recover from that.
And while those mandatory sentences for cannabis in the Boggs Act would be repealed, it would be in favor of the 1970s Controlled Substance Act. So basically, a tug of war on weed. Sometimes it was super illegal, and other times not as much. But the fact of the matter, it was and still is federally illegal. And this is where we diverge in California's cannabis industry and federal cannabis history somewhat change. And that's where we're going to pick up next time.
Well, this has been a very emotionally roller coaster of a day. I started high. You brought me low. You brought me to laughs, Jen.
This is one of the hardest stories I've ever had to write, because I can't just write I might as well just tell you to watch Sasquatch on Hulu, right? But I love the story so much that I was like, well, now I need to know everything.
Of course.
And I was like, well, maybe everybody else wants to know everything. And then here we are 3 stories later.
And, you take those divots where you go for an hour reading about something that you don't even include, but you just went down that rabbit hole. And then you're like, no, this is going to take me down too many more that I have to
I had to stop looking at legislation for weed.
Yeah.
Because it was just so back and forth and crazy. And then you have contradicting stories. And not yes, I did have books that I read, but I'm telling you, these were self-published with large font and not accurate.
With large font, love it.
I literally have one up there, and it's called Cash Crop, and it's all stories, and the font's like at 18. And it's 60 pages. I'm like,
it's like the font you use for your headline of your story.
Exactly.
Except it's all throughout it. Like
for
how
old
you try
people.
to increase the font when you're in school to the largest that the teacher would allow.
Exactly. So, well, next time we're gonna talk about um, weed in California and everything, and violence in California, and end up with our murder
Okay.
and see, did Bigfoot do it?
Well, this has been much
Mm.
better than when you covered the Nazis.
Yes. This was funner. This was a lot more fun. And Jimmy got way too many fun facts the whole weeks. Like the last 3 weeks of me writing, I'm like, did you know this about the Congo? River got low enough that this thing went over there, and that's why we have bonobos. I was like, this is so
And
cool.
was he just like, oh, that's what JJ does. And I'm like, he's not
Pretty
even
sure
listening.
not in their brain is.
Oh, I'm pretty sure he hears.
Don't forget to find us on our socials. Instagram, Facebook. Jimmy's on TikTok, and he has a grand time with it.
He does a fantastic job.
He really do. Check out our merch. Don't forget to tell us about your own Too Close to Home stories. Find us on all your platforms. Rate and subscribe. Just do me a solid and do that so we can become famous, and I can get better about this. Get my shit together. And the next time,
Stay safe.
keep your head on a swivel.
And don't bring it too close to home unless it's putting opium back in cough syrup so I can get a good night's sleep.
Please do. You remember remember those days when you had a Coca-Cola that really got you going?
I need that.
No wonder why women were like really getting shit done back in the 50s.
I know. And they wonder why we can't do it today. Well, sir, she had cocaine.
But then they gave her too much cocaine and then they ended up with lobotomies. So we're never going to win.
It's all about
balance. The more you know.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Too Close to Home, don't forget to rate and subscribe to us on most platforms. Follow us on our social media at Too Close Home Pod on Facebook, at Too Close Podcast on Instagram, or if you have your own Too Close to Home experience, shoot us your story at tooclosetohome@yahoo.com. Thanks for listening.